Sabres head into the All-Star break, off for a little bit. So let's talk about some big picture stuff today. Coaching. Don Granato, and if they were to move on from Granato, who could replace him? Top 5 coaching candidates should the Sabres let Don Granato go. Coming up here in the Locked On Sabres podcast.
Your Locked On Sabres, your daily podcast on the Buffalo Sabres. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And thanks for making Locked On Sabres your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more right now. New customers get $200 back in bonus bets if your best bet of $5 or more wins. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. The Sabres head into the All-Star break because of wins by the not the New Jersey Devils, the Detroit Red Wings, red team. I was just looking at some other Devil stuff. The Red Wings 9 points ahead of the Buffalo Sabres for the final playoff spot in the Eastern Conference. So despite 3 out of 4, 2 back-to-back to end this stretch on the road, the Sabres find themselves way back of the postseason. So they head to the All-Star break, and Rasmus Dahlin will head to the All-Star game, which will take place on Saturday, February 3rd at 3 o'clock, which means we have a week of big picture stuff really to look at here on the show. We'll have a mailbag episode coming up this week. I've got coaching candidates today. We'll check in with some around the league stuff as well. The Sabres will return home a week from Tuesday. So next Tuesday at home against the Dallas Stars, 7 o'clock on February 6th for the first of 4 straight home games. Dallas, St. Louis, LA, Florida, all coming to town in the next couple of weeks here. But we've got a ways to go until that. Before we get to my coach candidates and the idea of firing Don Granato, which, that's a conversation to be had right now. He is the betting favorite to be the next head coach fired. Who could they move on him for? Who should they move on from him for if they were to do it? I'm not rushing Granato off the stage. I like Don Granato. I am not confident in their decision-making if they were to, for who they would replace him with. I think because of what the alternative likely would be, would hang on to Don Granato, keep going, trust that he'll figure it out. But you have to have the talk, and it's not a crazy idea at all, given its results, right? This league, more than any other sports league, likes to cycle through candidates, likes to cycle through coaches. And when you don't win, you get moved on from. That's how it goes. This team doesn't win. So it's inevitable that this talk was coming the longer these results would go. News update and then Sabres droughtology of the day to get to before we get to coach candidates, starting with the news update that Devin Levi has indeed been sent to Rochester, which I predicted because it just makes too much sense with he hasn't played a lot of games recently for the Sabres. He's only played 1 game since January 10th in the last 19 days for the Sabres. He's only played 1 game. He went down to Rochester for that quick stint. But now he's back with the Amerks, and you get him some games down there. I think that naturally was a smart idea, given that not only are the Sabres off this week, but they also don't have a back-to-back games in back-to-back days until March 2nd and 3rd against the Golden Knights and the Winnipeg Jets. March 2nd and 3rd. Now, there are a handful of games in between there. Will they play Luukkonen every game? I mean, they might. I don't know. But a month straight of UPL games, I mean, he, of course, would have to perform in all of those games as well. So I might guess that Levi gets the call at some point during that month, that he's not going to sit in Rochester for all of February. But I think he might be down there for most of February because that's where he's going to get some action. Now, the Amerks also have a bit of a mini break, mixed in here as well. They'll play on Wednesday against Syracuse, and then they'll play Friday and Saturday against Laval, and then they'll be off for 6 days. So they kind of have that mixed in break as well. But they have 3 games during the Sabres off week. Then the Amerks have an off week. And then the Amerks get back in action. And I bet they kind of go back and forth. Levi stays in Rochester for these 3 games. Maybe he gets 1 or 2 of them. Then he comes back with the Sabres. Maybe he backs up. Maybe he plays a game. And then goes back down to Rochester where he plays a bunch in the month of February. That's a guess at how they'll go about it, but I think they're going to be playing this song and dance with Levi the rest of the way to ensure that he is the guy playing for the Sabres when it's not Luukkonen, and at the same time, he's getting enough starts between Buffalo and Rochester to further along his development. I think that's the game you got to play with Devin Levi. Droughtology of the day. This one is also a little bit newsworthy because former NHLer now, Zack Kassian, has signed in Czechia, the Czech formerly known Czech Republic, with Sparta Praha. He is done in the NHL. He is he's done that thing that a lot of NHLers do, where you're in the twilight of your career and you can't find an NHL team to take you. So let me go travel around Europe and play a little bit of hockey. That's the stage of Zack Kassian's career. Droughtology of the day goes to Zack Kassian today. In the course of the Sabres drought, Zack Kassian has been an elite OHL junior hockey player, become a bar-brawling Milan Lucic super prospect, right? Remember, everyone was like, oh, this guy's going to be Lucic. That was during the drought that he hadn't played yet for the Sabres, and we were all talking about how good he was. So in the drought, becomes a star Lucic-style prospect. He makes his NHL debut, gets traded for Cody Hodgson, goes on to have a 600-plus game NHL career, and now rides off into the sunset in Europe, all during the course of the Sabres drought. You can fit Zack Kassian's entire NHL and really hockey career into the Buffalo Sabres drought. That's how long it's been. Sorry to depress everybody. All right, let's get to the coaching element of today's show. Don Granato. All right, let's play the what-if game. I don't want to see them fire him. I would listen to it, of course. And if you brought me the right candidate, and there might be a few of those, I'm like, sign me up. If you told me right now this guy is going to replace Don Granato, I'm in. But top 5 coach candidates to replace Don Granato in a combination of both the likelihood of this happening and how good of an idea I think it is. Let's get into it. Let's start off with number 5. And this guy makes the list more so because, to me, the likelihood of it than how good of an idea it is. Number 5 is Seth Appert, the head coach of the Amerks. 10 years in college before the Amerks with, I don't even know how to pronounce the college, Renaissor, I think it is. He never finished higher than 4th in the ECAC. It's not even one of the good conferences in college hockey. The ECAC, which the other teams in the ECAC, we're talking about Quinnipiac, we're talking about Cornell, Princeton, Yale, Dartmouth, Harvard, like the Ivy Leagues are really what we're looking at. And he never finished higher than 4th in that conference in a decade that he was there. He worked before that, the US U18 team. This is a developmental coach. And maybe he's good at developing players, but we don't have a long track record of winning, even at those levels. In fact, maybe this goes to his credit and why he would be in the running. The most success he's had in terms of his team success is the Amerks last year, making their run deep into the Calder Cup playoffs, into the conference finals. Appert, to me, makes this list because he's the most likely candidate to replace Don Granato if they should fire Don Granato. He is cheap. That's a big thing here. I mean, he's already under contract. I don't know how much appetite the Sabres have to pay more coaches not to coach for them. So you've already got this guy under contract. You're already paying this guy. It would be an easy business decision to elevate him. He's already familiar with a lot of the players, spent time at the Sabres in training camp. I think he has to be on this list at number 5 because I think he would be the favorite to be the coach should they fire Don Granato. Number 4 on my list. This one I go back and forth on. Gerard Gallant, former head coach of, way back when Columbus, but in recent years, which is where I really want to, point the analysis here, is, of course, with Florida, with Vegas, and with the New York Rangers. In the last 10 years, since the 2014-15 season, let's just look at that. I don't want to dive too much into his time with Columbus in 2003 and evaluate how good a coach he is based on that. Let's just do the last 10 years. Gerard Gallant, in that time, the last decade, 313, 189, and 64. That is a 99-point head coach. Per 82 games coached in the last 10 years, you're getting 99 points from Gerard Gallant. He has made the playoffs in all but 3 seasons in that 10-year stretch. So 9 seasons worth, he made the playoffs 6, missed it 3 times, including 2 deep playoff runs, took the Rangers to the conference finals, took the Golden Knights to the finals, of course. But with Gallant, you never had him coaching a young team. In Florida, maybe the Florida was the closest you had to this, but they had a lot of veteran players, and he turned them into a division-winning team that hadn't made the playoffs in forever. So kind of ended a drought there. Then he goes to Vegas. Because of expansion draft, Vegas was more of a veteran team. They got pieced together, and Gallant took over a team, though, that was pretty much an established veteran team that had already, by the way, been to the finals. So I don't necessarily, or no, they had not been to the finals yet. Sorry. That was the outset, the original Golden Knights. And then he goes to the Rangers, again, an aged veteran team, had some success there. He's the drill sergeant type. He's the hard-ass type. And maybe that's your cup of tea. Maybe you think that's the kind of coach that could whip the boys into shape. But I don't know. I don't have a lot of track record with him that says he's the right type of coach for the youngest team in hockey. And I think I want to read into at least a little bit. This guy wears out his welcome everywhere he goes. For all the success he has, everywhere he's gone, at the first chance to get rid of the guy, those teams get rid of the guy. Florida had a decade of being terrible, and Gallant finishes in first place in the division. And then the next year, they start 11-10, 500, and they left him on the tarmac in Carolina. They didn't even bring him on the plane. They hated him so much. They kicked him off the plane, basically. And that was for going 500. They wanted him out at the moment they could do it. How about Vegas? Vegas starts their franchise. They go to the Cup. The next year, they go to the playoffs, win 43 games. The next year, they start the year 24, 19, and 6, and they fire him. They were in first place when they fired him. That's not even like your first chance. That's just, we got to get rid of this guy. We hate him. And then with the Rangers, the last 2 years, 52-24, 47-22, 1 deep playoff run, and then a first-round exit. Get out of here. Oh, I don't know. I think there's some personality questions here with Gerard Gallant that he finds a way to get kicked out even when he's winning games like that. Not my cup of tea, but I'll listen to any idea right now. When we come back, number 2 and 3 on our list, and then you got to stick around for number 1. Number 1 on my list, I don't think is who you think it is. And I'm real excited to get to it. So that's coming up here in the Locked On Sabres podcast as we talk about coaching candidates here on today's show. We are presented on the Locked On Sabres podcast by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. What brings home the winning trophy is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. Back here on the Locked On Sabres podcast, thanks for making us your first listen every day. When you're done with us, be sure to go make Locked On Sports Today your next listen. Check them out on YouTube. They're the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, spending plenty today on Championship Sunday with the Chiefs and the Niners advancing to the Super Bowl. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube. Subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. Also, be sure to check us out on our text line, joinsubtext.com/lockedonsabres. You can sign up there, and then from there on, it's just me. It's just texting on your phone. We're going to do a mailbag episode, so throw your questions in there, and we'll be answering them this week on the show. Let's get back into my top 5 coaching candidates that hypothetically would replace Don Granato. And let's now get to number 3. 5 was Seth Appert, 4 was Gerard Gallant. I kind of wanted to mix it up, a different type of coach at each ranking here. Number 3, let's go the assistant coach route. Marc Savard, former Boston Bruin skilled player, playmaker. He is now the assistant coach of the Calgary Flames, and it's not necessarily going great in Calgary in terms of team success. I mean, we talk about them a lot in terms of how everybody wants out of Calgary. The Flames this season, 22-22-5. They're 5 points out of a playoff spot. Savard is coming off a nice little career as the head coach of the Windsor Spitfires in the OHL. So had success at the junior level, in his 40s, so a younger coach, not the retread type, hasn't got the crack yet at being an NHL head coach, and he's probably going to get it at some point in time. He gets a lot of credit reading about him for the purpose of this podcast in terms of his creativity for the offensive side of the game and what he's done for power plays, both at the junior level and now with Calgary, in terms of being creative, mixing things up. And that's why I picked him over other assistant coaches for this ranking. Is that exactly what the Sabres need right now? Is a guy to spark the power play. And listen, I don't necessarily know if I want to go right back to another first-time head coach. Ralph Kruger was kind of a first-time head coach. I mean, we're talking 40 games with Edmonton, right? Like, it wasn't much before he became the coach of the Sabres. Phil Housley was a first-time NHL head coach for the Sabres. Don Granato was a first-time NHL head coach. Since Dan Bilesma, they've consistently gone for inexperienced types. I don't mind that. I usually like that. But I don't know if that's where my mind is at for the next guy if they were to let go Don Granato. But if they were going to go back for first-time head coach, I think Savard is a reasonable idea because of the power play acumen, the offensive element of the game, working with young players with Windsor, and he's a respectable idea, a respectable name in the league, not just somebody that you got off the street. That's number 3. Number 2, you might be thinking that number 2 is going to be number 1 all along. I got number 1 here. I don't think you're going to see coming. Maybe you will. Number 2, Rod Brind Amour. This is the guy. This is the guy we're going to talk the most about, that we're going to be tracking the most when it comes to rumors and reports. Rod Brind Amour. Why are we talking about Rod Brind Amour, who is currently the head coach of the Carolina Hurricanes? If you missed our conversations about him before, he's on an expiring contract. And there have been rumors and reports over the last couple of years about a disconnect between Brind Amour and Don Wandel, the owner of the Carolina Hurricanes, and that maybe that's not the greatest working relationship. So his contract expires at the end of the year, and of course, the natural tie-in for the Sabres is his relationship with Kevyn Adams. And they played together, of course. They were both leaders on that 05-06 Hurricanes team. I know it's our least favorite sports team ever. And the idea of the two guys from that team running the show here in some way does make my stomach turn. But anything to get them back on track, right? And Brind Amour, there's nobody they could hire that is at all reasonable to me, or like you can imagine them hiring, that I think would be a more respected name in the league than this guy. They can't do better for league circles. If they hired Ron Brind Amour, universal love from everybody. The Greg Wyshynski's at ESPN, the Elliot Friedmans at Sportsnet, the talking heads on TV. Everybody that covers or talks about hockey would love this move for the Buffalo Sabres. And Brind Amour is already a drought breaker. He walked into Carolina and the Hurricanes were on a 9-year playoff drought. And in his first season, he broke it. Year 1, he kicked that 9-year playoff drought out the door, and they've made the playoffs 5 for 5 times since that happened. He makes the playoffs every year, consistent winner. He's done well, by the way, to get the most out of a young group in Carolina. They're more of a veteran group now, but in the first couple years of his tenure in Carolina, that was a young team. and he found a way to maximize it. He found a way to get them to the postseason, to have sustained success. They haven't quite won a cup yet. I mean, obviously they haven't won a cup yet, but they're a team that's knocking on the door year after year after year, and you'd obviously sign up for that if you're the Sabres. It would be a dream, I think. The reason I don't have them number one is I doubt the Sabres can pull it off. I'm skeptical. This team, they have not earned the respect of getting a coach like that. You have to think about it from both angles. Okay, if you're the Sabres, why would you want Rod Brind Amour? That's easier to answer. If you're Rod Brind Amour, why would you want the Sabres? Man, you better be best friends with Kevyn Adams if that's what's going to really get you to go to Buffalo. Because the crowds have disappeared. Not to blame them. They should have. They should have long ago because of how bad the team's been. But there's no atmosphere. There's no energy in the city or the fan base for the team right now. And there's the team itself, like, I don't know, it's probably hard to buy into the team having sustained success. But maybe he sees it as a challenge. Maybe, the money could entice him. I don't know, would Pegula not want to pay a coach unless it's a guy like Brind Amour? Right? We thought they were going to have an internal salary cap once upon a time. But then, we can get Taylor Hall. Ooh, okay, I might want to I'll spend money but for that. And that's where I wonder, like, Pegula might not want to spend a ton of money on a coach unless he thinks he can get Rod Brind Amour, and then maybe he gets enticed to do it. That's where I think it could be possible. I think it's more likely Brind Amour would use the Sabres as leverage. That's what I think. If he gets available the offseason, you're going to see reports and rumors about him interviewing and be rumored to go to the Sabres. And that whole time, in the back of my head, I'm going to be thinking, I wonder if this is just Brind Amour using the Sabres to get more money out of other teams. But I hope they could pull it off. He's number two. I don't think you see number one coming. Maybe you do. Let me know if you saw it coming the whole way. Number one on my Sabres coach candidate list, if they should move on from Don Granato. After this, you're in the Locked On Sabres podcast. We are presented by FanDuel Sportsbook. Happy Super Bowl to all who celebrate from FanDuel, America's number one sportsbook. If you're like me, Super Bowl Sunday, all about scoring the best seat on the couch, grabbing your favorite football snacks, and placing some super bets. FanDuel has so many ways for you to end the season with a W or two. 3, 4. Not only can you bet on who will win Super Bowl 58, but FanDuel also has bets for which players will score a touchdown, how many points will be scored, and so much more. Tons of prop bets available. New customers join today. You'll get up to $200 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. Just visit FanDuel.com/locked-on to sign up. That's FanDuel.com/locked-on. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the National Football League. Final segment here on the Locked On Sabres podcast. Hit up our text line. Join subtext.com/locked-on-sabres. Become a sortie today, and let me know if the Sabres are to move on from Don Granato, who you would like to see be their head coach. Number one on my list, because it's a proven winner. It's a guy who very recently found lots of success with a very young hockey team. A guy that would come to Buffalo, to me, undoubtedly would come to Buffalo. And I think's got just enough juice left in the tank to see this actually happening. Lindy Ruff. That's right. The homecoming. I'm going to hit you in the feels here with this one. I'm going to really pull your heartstrings with number one on my list. Potential Granato replacements with Lindy. I think you're allowed to have a Lindy Ruff conversation here because I referenced earlier, Don Granato's the favorite to be the next coach fired in the NHL. Want to know who number two is? It's Lindy Ruff. Lindy Ruff is the second leading favorite. I've seen on Twitter Devils fans back in their camp of wanting to see Ruff fired because they're having a bad year. They have not overcome their injuries. I saw even them wondering about whether him and Jack Hughes mesh well together. I kind of doubt that. Last year, it sounded like it was all fine and rosy when they were winning. The Devils are currently 6 points out of a playoff spot. They've lost 7 of their last 10. And that team, because of how great they did last year, has expectations. So I could see them firing Lindy Ruff. maybe after the season. I want him to keep climbing that all-time wins list, so I hope not. But can't you imagine if the Sabres move on from Granato and Lindy Ruff's available? Couldn't you see it happening? In part, if you're looking around at proven winners, right? Retread guys, veteran coaches, guys that have consistently made the playoffs. Lindy's maybe the best they can get their hands on. I don't even know that Gerard Gallant would want the Sabre job. I don't know that Brind Amour will want the Sabre job. I don't know how good a job it is, especially given the questions of how much they might want to pay if they're already paying Granato, who's just signed an extension. Lindy, though, you know he's upset by the state of the Sabres. You know he wears this city like a badge of honor on his chest. And if you went to the Rick Jeanneret Memorial at the arena during the offseason, Lindy, you could see how happy he was when he thought at the time that Don Granato had this team on track. You could see when talking about the history of the franchise and RJ, how much this team means to him, even still. I mean, he's going to live here when he's done coaching in the NHL. And if I'm Lindy Ruff, and this is a total guess. I don't know Lindy like this, obviously, and I haven't heard this from anybody. If I'm just guessing at what's going on in Lindy's brain, he would look at the Sabre job and go, my last act in the National Hockey League, because 63 years old, coaches can go to 70 in the NHL. Ken Hitchcock, Bruce Boudreau, these guys have coached in their late 60s. But if I'm Lindy at 63, I'm thinking, this is my last act in the NHL. What better last act than let me get this franchise that I spent 4 decades with, 40 years as a player and a coach. Let me get them back on track. And then I'll ride off into the sunset from there. Hell, maybe if it goes really well, I'll take one last stab at winning a Stanley Cup. But I'm going to get this team back on track. And from the Sabres that's from Lindy's perspective. From the Sabres perspective, I think Lindy's recent success in New Jersey is enough to get me to he's a reasonably good idea to be the head coach. He's maybe the right mix of veteran coach that you might want to be a little harder on the players, a little harsher on the players to kind of hold them responsible, if you will, in certain moments, discipline them in the right spots, while at the same time, we've heard about Lindy over the recent years that he's kind of adapted. He's kind of, with the Devils last year, and even with Dallas to a lesser extent before that, he's been more of a modern coach. He's not always bag skating these guys like Tortorella used to do. He's maybe a little bit more able to coach a young team like that. I mean, last year is a great job by Lindy. That team was as young as the Sabres were, that Devils team. And they were 1 point from beating Brind Amour's Hurricanes to win the division. They had 112 points last year. So I think what he just did with the Devils is enough to show, hey, this guy thrived with a young team, and it was only 2 years ago that he did that. I think it's a good enough idea. And I think it would kind of re-energize Sabre fans, certain segment. I don't think it would be a universally loved idea. I think other people would feel like we're just going backwards, right? We're going back into the past to try to fix things. And I could listen to that as a counter to this, but I love Lindy, and I think he's a damn good head coach, even still in the NHL, and he's my number one not in-house, but a number one candidate because of the likelihood and because of the coaching acumen to replace Don Granato should they move on from Don Granato. Lindy at number 1. Let me know again what your thought would be on that, because I don't think that would be a universally loved idea. Lindy back with the Sabres. All right, and let me know who your coach candidate would be. Locked On Sabres on our text line, joinsubtext.com/LockedOnSabres. That's going to do it for us. Shoot those mailbags over. We're going to have a mailbag portion of the show coming up next, and we'll talk some All-Star stuff as the weekend gets closer with the All-Star game coming on Saturday, skills competition on Friday. Rasmus Dahlin will be participating for Buffalo. Thanks for listening to Locked On Sabres. Go check out Locked On Sports Today for all your football coverage, 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, the first ever. Like and subscribe on YouTube, and also listen wherever you get your podcast. We'll talk to you next time here on the Locked On Sabres podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.